Okay. Welcome, everyone. Sorry for the delay. It is Thursday, January 28th, 2021. We're here for the purpose of discussing our superintendent search. I'd like to welcome board members who are all here in attendance and our search consultants, Molly Schwartzhoff and Mike Collins. We've also got Alan Kersley, our business administrator, with us. I'd like to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you'll stand and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Like I said, we're here for the purpose of discussing our superintendent search. We'd like to have a quick discussion about the next steps of the process in terms of community engagement and timeline. And I'd like to turn the time over to Mike Collins and Molly Schwartzhoff to begin that conversation.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Melissa. And Mike, you can jump in anytime and stop me.
Sure.
But when we're talking about involvement, we're talking about not first round, but when we get down to the second round of candidates where you'd have your finalists. So that's going to be your top 2 or top 3 candidates, depending on where we end up with. Based off of good old COVID, I think we're kind of limited with what we can and can't do. Pre-COVID, we would have done everything in person, had possible meet and greets in an auditorium. That's just simply not a safe practice right now with where we're at. So what we can do and what we have done, we've been doing this since March, is what we would offer is having focus groups or forums very similar to what we're doing right now. So where there would possibly be representatives that are either selected from within that group, teachers nominate a couple, 6 to 10 teachers to be a part of that focus group. Same thing with parents, students, support staff, everybody that got to have participation in the forums that we did earlier, discussing the qualities and doing that profile development, and have them do sessions very similar to what we're doing here, where they would have the opportunity to meet with the top 2 or top 3 candidates individually and ask them questions. That is what I would propose as best case scenario for as far as safety, convenience factor, making sure we get more people included that we can. Another option, and it depends on people's comfort level, is that we have fewer representatives, but we space them out, socially distanced, in an auditorium with the candidate up on the stage. That is another option that we can do. But those are the 2 top ideas that we have done successfully, that we know how to run. And obviously, if we do the forums like what we're doing here on Zoom with a candidate and the representatives, that could be streamed so that if it's a teacher group, for example, and they've got 4, 6, 10, however many representatives asking these questions, that they would all have input on the questions that are being asked, but then they could watch it live streamed and see the answers and see the Q&A so that they are involved as much as possible. Any questions on those two kind of, I know that that's a very Cliff Notes version of what I'm describing, but any thoughts immediately on either of those?
Questions, board members, thoughts?
I support the idea of meeting remotely, but I would like to point out that it seems ironic and contradictory to me that we are asking for these meetings to happen remotely when we're requiring our students to return to school.
And we can certainly do a hybrid, if we want to go that route where there's an option for people, not just students, sorry, you said students and I got my brain, of doing where they could be watching remotely and then have a few representatives in person in that auditorium. The only thing that I don't like about doing the auditorium or the more in-person route is that it really limits the involvement of people, because it's going to have to be a smaller amount.
Mhm.
And Mike and I met with your stakeholder groups, and you had an excellent turnout with each of them. And I don't want to
Right.
limit the voices that can be heard.
No, and I support remote meeting through Zoom. I think what you're saying is that hybrid is less effective. And so I support that idea too. So I think that those are two very true propositions. And I just want to point out to the board that they're not things that we've supported.
My question is just in terms of the timeline to just make it clear again. So once we have our finalists, these are the options we're talking about right now, right?
Correct. So this would be when you get down to your top 2 or top 3.
Okay.
The second round of interviews. The first round will need to be confidential, just
Yeah.
because you're going to have a lot more candidates, and we don't want anybody to drop out. When you get your name out there,
Yeah.
everybody likes to get one of 3 odds versus one of 6 odds when you're putting your name out there and possibly jeopardizing your career. Christy?
Hi, thanks, Molly. So I just want to say thank you for being so thoughtful about the different ways that we could, hold these interviews. Of course, we wouldn't want to put anybody at risk asking them to come on a plane. That's the difference. So being able to meet together, in a safe area here, but I would not want any of our candidates getting on a plane and having to fly here to be interviewed. So I appreciate, you thinking through that. Thank you.
Christy, and I do want to clarify too that it may get to where your top 2 or 3 may want to come on ground. I will be very honest with you. I have not had a search, and that's not to say that this wouldn't be my first one, where a candidate has not said, I need to be there. I need to see the schools. I need to meet these people. I need to shake their hands, or fist bump, I guess now is the correct term that we do, but really be there in person, because ultimately they are going to be moving their families. And nobody's taking that lightly during pandemic. So I certainly appreciate what you're saying, Christy, that there's not that pressure of either be here or you're out. But I will tell you that I will be shocked if your top 2 or top 3 do not say, no, I'm either going to take a long road trip if it's within driving distance, or yep, I'm going to hop on a plane, because it's a big, big career move. So I would be shocked if they don't get on a plane or drive.
Molly, thank you. Thank you as well for all that you've done thus far. And, it is correct. We do not want to have, especially during variant that's going on right now, we definitely do not want to cause any exposure in so many ways. However, I think it'll be, in my opinion, the finalist, we will need them to be in person. The reason is because when you are face to face with the individual, the relationship, the interview process, and you sense so many things, from their reactions, emotions, and the list goes on and on. So that's my input from my own experience in the HR process of the interviewing. So, that's, I present that to the board, and we'll see what they'll all decide as well.
All right, thank you, Mohammed. And I do want to clarify too, when it comes to the board, those will be in person as long as the candidate has no hesitation either driving or getting on a plane. Those will be in person. I've had to do it several different ways. In the beginning of COVID, where it was 10, groups of 10 or less, it was no problem. It's going to be all based on comfort level and what the numbers and what the recommendations are. I've also done it where it's been a lunch where half of the board had lunch with the candidate. The other half was virtual, participating in the lunch, but virtually. And then they did the dinner with the reverse, where the other half met with the candidate in person and the other board members were virtual. So they were all still there, but just kept the numbers and the risk at a minimum. But I agree with you, Mohammed, 100%, that when it comes time for interviewing, I think it's important to have that face-to-face I hate the terminology, so bear with me, but I've heard it so many times, but to touch them, feel them, smell them, really kind of get to know them. And I think I think there's a lot of weight to that. And there's certainly different ways that we can make sure that everybody stays safe and that we keep the risk at a minimum, but that you all feel informed when it comes time for making that decision. I think the biggest thing is when we're talking about our focus groups and having groups of people. I think we want to try to minimize that risk if we can. That would be my advice. I really think, especially when we're talking about, kids and students and parents, we don't want to limit those kids or those parents or those staff members who may be at risk with them still wanting to have some input, because we want as much input as we can get. And I really think that maybe doing the virtual where it's Zoom, much like this, might be the best fit for all of us. That's just my recommendation. And just based off the participation, I would recommend having a few representatives doing those questions with the candidates individually, or the group would be with the candidate individually. I want to clarify. But in no means does that mean, and I'm going to pick on the teacher group, it does not mean that out of the, let's just say six representatives that get to ask questions, that no other teachers get to participate in creating those questions. It would still be a group effort that they would help create those questions. They just would not be the ones asking. They could still watch the responses though, if that makes sense. Nate?
Yes, Molly. And I would agree that I think we need to have, some very specific focus groups, especially when it comes to parents and internal and external stakeholders. I'm sure it'd probably be a very similar grouping of individuals or organizations that we met with first. But I would also like to suggest to our board relative to how they feel of including some specific, kind of focus groups with key leaders in our community, like Mayor Mendenhall, maybe even leadership from the city council. If there's legislators that represent our communities and in our school district from the House and the Senate on a state level, I think that those interactions are really important, and would also advocate for that. And then, of course, our employee groups in some way, shape, or form. Including them in this process. I don't know if that's in the interview itself or if it's more focus group where they're asking their own questions and providing feedback back to the board. I'm open to all of those scenarios.
Absolutely. And just to kind of keep in mind too, Nate, I mean, if the candidates, and like I said, I haven't had a single search where candidates haven't wanted to go to the district. So you would be my first if we get to that. But when they're going to be here, overnight, because the odds are they're probably going to be traveling. There may be somebody closer where they go home at night, but they're going to have them all day. And your interview is not going to take all day. Interviewing with stakeholders is not going to take all day. So we really encourage keeping that ball rolling. So that would be a great time to meet with the legislature, as you mentioned, or some of those other groups where they would have the opportunity, whether it be done virtual or, one-on-one, socially distanced, however that works out. So keep in mind, you do have a large chunk of time to kind of play around with and to fill as well. But the biggest thing is I would really want to advocate for those people that made time to participate and answer those questions initially and be part of those forums. I think we really need to give them that due respect of allowing them to participate in this session as well. They gave up time. They respectfully, came in, answered our questions, gave us feedback, and they were so great. And those groups are really your core groups for your community and for your stakeholders. And I would really advocate to kind of give them an opportunity as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Molly. Let me just see if Jenny, do you have something you want to add to this? And then we'll go to Mohammed. No, you're good. Okay, go ahead, Mohammed.
Molly, so I'm sure everyone would have this question, which is, can you walk us from step A through Z, starting from today? Where are we heading? Basically, it's like a timeline, so everyone will understand where we are standing and what we are doing.
Absolutely. So today you're going to go through the recommended candidates that we are presenting to you, and identifying those that you want to interview. That will be done the first week of February, and those will be done virtually. Those will be done very similar to what we're doing here and now. I can't tell you what those times or dates look like because it's all going to depend on how many you want to interview and how you want to set up that schedule. So that's why I say the week of the first week of February. Following the final interview, you will be stuck with myself and Mr. Collins again, and we'll be doing another scoring matrix. In no way, and I want to be very clear because I know you all have seen the materials, there's a scoring matrix. In no way are you obligated based on that scoring to move these people forward. It is simply an opener for discussion. That is all it is. This is your search. So we will do a matrix following that final interview of everybody that you interviewed for the first round. You will then have a discussion on who you want to talk about interviewing for the second go round. And that would be ideally in person. Like I said, as Christy pointed out, if somebody says, I'm not comfortable, we'll have to make those accommodations. But again, you would be my first search that I've had since March of last year that would happen with. So then we would get those scheduled. It's all going to depend on logistics of where they're at, how far they're coming from. And if you want to do 1 interview per day, if you want to do 2 per day, whether it's 2 or 3 candidates, all that kind of is going to impact our scheduling. But that would be the second week of February. Following the last interview, you'll meet with Mike and myself again. We'll do our third matrix. And again, you are not obligated by the ranking on that to hire that person. It simply opens the door for discussion. And then you will deliberate and identify who your top finalist would be. During that week of interviews of your top 2 or top 3, that's when we're talking about stakeholder involvement. And that's when they would have the opportunity to ask questions and then provide feedback. You all have the form. I included it in materials. It's called the Candidate Impression Form. And so all of your stakeholders would have the opportunity to complete that and submit it back to you. And Mike and I made it very clear when we met with your stakeholders that they do not get to score or rank the candidates. It is your hire, it is your employee, but they do get to fill out things that they liked, things that they didn't like, strengths, weaknesses. Maybe they saw something in their interview that you don't see in yours. So it's a different perspective. Then they will give those feedback forms back to you. You will have the chance to read those prior to making your final decision.
Thank you for that, Molly. Any other questions for board members about this, the process, the timeline, input on that? Are we comfortable with the proposal as outlined by Molly? Yeah. Okay. It sounds like there's also going to be room for engagement all the way through the process too, for us just to kind of tweak some of these things and keep that ball moving forward. Would love to be able to see an addition to your infographic, Quelly, so that we can have that really clear on the website. Any other comments? I know when we began this process and we hired Ray and Associates to be our consultant, we were looking for a firm that would be really good at helping us gather the community input, because we wanted this to be a highly engaged process for our community. And I'm really appreciative of the efforts that they've made on that, in that behalf. I think that we're on the right track, but always we're open to feedback, because we want to make sure that our community feels engaged in this process, and then engaged with the new superintendent as well. Any other questions about timeline or input or the next steps of the process? Okay, seeing none, I would like to take a motion to go into a closed executive session for the purpose of discussing personnel.
I'll make that motion. I move that we go into closed session for the purpose of personnel at 5:30 on January 28th.
I'll second the motion.
We've got a motion and a second. Let's go ahead and vote on that motion.
Yes.
Janisika, yes.
Catherine Kennedy, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
Melissa Ford, yes.
Christy Sweat, yes.
Okay. Thank you for joining us for the open session of this meeting, and we're going to stop the